Hello, everyone. I just want to say again, the meeting is being recorded and we will be posting this so that it can be viewed by others later on. And so we got our first snow today. And I was expecting, that we'd have maybe an inch. And on my deck, when I looked out from my bed this morning, because I've got sliding glass doors in my bedroom, there was 3.5 inches on the railing of the deck. And I was like, oh my gosh.
That's real snow. That's
Yeah.
that's real good.
Yeah.
I have also hit winter time, and I can actually tell by the light coming into your place. You've got the same light as I've got coming in my
Right.
place. That thing that happens when it snows and the whole place just fills with light because of the way the snow bounces ever around. I love that
Yeah. Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And so my nephew gave me this great idea last year, which I had never thought about, was pull out the leaf blower to
oh,
blow the snow off my deck and through over to my car. So I did that and I blew off my car too because it was the kind of snow that
Yeah, it was
was
really light and
yeah,
powdery.
yeah, it was powdery. So it was easy enough to do that. So that was easy rather than having to get snow up the arms of my um, coat and all of that. So here we are. I just am filling a little time waiting for people to show up. So anyway, the weather is always um, a good beginning to the thing. So Sandra is in a rainy weather. Yeah. And I'd like to welcome everyone. Where are you from? Where are you looking in from?
We've got you muted to start. We'll invite questions later, and at that point, feel free to unmute yourself.
But
But in the meantime, you can type in the chat and we'll see it there.
Sacramento, yay. Boston. I imagine you're getting cool too. I think the East, Central Illinois. Where in Central Illinois? Oh,
I love watching people pop up where they're
right,
from. I find it
right.
endlessly
Yeah.
fascinating.
So I am from downstate Illinois. Oh, 35 miles west of Springfield. I'm from Alton, Illinois, and it was on the river across the river from St. Louis. So that's where I grew up. And
And we've got Georgia, Indiana, Madison, Wisconsin, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, Salt Lake City, Yates Center, Kansas, Roanoke, Virginia, Eastern Shore of Maryland, Michigan,
wonderful.
New Jersey. Whoa, we've got a lot of people here
Yeah,
today.
thank you. Cool. So Sarah, we're here to talk about you and gnomes. And um, so we approached you to do this episode of our club, and you came up with going to cold spaces where you would see the the Northern Lights.
Yeah,
So tell me
it's
about.
Well, so my parents live just outside of town here. I'm in Brandon, Manitoba, so that's just north of North Dakota. And we go visit them for supper every Sunday and have since we moved here in 2001. And when our kids were little, um, we were going through one of those cycles where the sun was doing more solar flares, and solar flares equal northern lights. And we got really used to seeing the northern lights pretty much every time we drove out for supper because, of course, it's dark all the time in winter. And so we would see the northern lights, and then the sun went quiet for a while, and I just started missing the northern lights. I just felt like something that had been there all the time suddenly stopped being there. And it was completely unplanned. I didn't know that this was going to be a time when the light cycle was going to rise up again. And that the fact that just as we were about to announce, or right as we were talking about the
Right.
gnome, the whole continent was able to see the northern lights
Yeah,
almost. Like that was
exactly.
so unexpected and like brilliant advertising on our part. But it actually sprang from just a nostalgia almost for seeing the dancing in the sky that I guess I took for granted. And then I started talking to the kids, and they're like, we don't remember seeing the Northern Lights. I'm like, what do you mean? It was every Sunday almost. Like it was such a thing. You guys would be like, we're like, guys, the Northern Lights. And they'd be like, yes, Mom, we know. But then it went away and they didn't have that memory. And so we've spent most of this fall, every time they talk about Northern Lights, we're leaving the city, driving north where there's less light. And it was that sort of experience. And for me, gnomes are very tied to seasonal experiences in nature. I mean, I'll often give them city folk jobs or like little stories about being in bookshops or whatever. But when I'm very seasonal about them. So there was something about this and thinking about the night sky and just the chance to play around with a little bit of color work again. It's been a little while since I've done a color work gnome. And so that's how she came about. And then the fact that you guys were doing a kit, I was really excited about because I've wanted to have someone knitting their own hat for a really long time. But I've always worried if like I did it for a mystery gnome or something like that, people wouldn't be able to source their own little knitting needles and then they'd feel left out. And so this was like the perfect chance because I knew you guys would say yes if I sweet talked you. I just basically had to twinkle at Helen a little bit and she
Yep.
Very susceptible me.
yeah. But it's such a great idea to have a knitted thing knitting itself. I don't know. It charms my pants off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you read fantasy, I take it, which probably ties into gnomes,
Yes.
I would think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, do we really want to start a reader off on books? That's a dangerous topic. We could be here a while.
yeah, I've been reading fantasy now for about 5 years, I think. And what I'm finding is that I'm liking ones that have, of course, female heroines. Unfortunately, a lot of the fantasy that's written by men is a lot of,
Yeah.
So,
okay, then I have a big recommendation for you and anybody else. There is a bookstore in Toronto, Ontario. We go to Toronto almost every January, and we always go to this bookstore. It's called Back of Phoenix, and all they do is sci-fi and fantasy. And that's all they've done since 1972. So you go in there and you like tell them what you want, and they'll be like, "Ooh, you liked this and this? Here are 5 suggestions." Now think about then they leave you alone to read the first pages and see if you like it. So I was talking about how I really love fantasy, but I'm kind of like weary of end of the world problems. And they said, "Hey, have you heard about cozy fantasy?" So there's a whole genre of fantasy that's basically like serving each other tea, but it's fantasy. And so if you Google cozy fantasy, you'll come with a lot of cool titles. But the first one I think that really kicked it off, at least for me, and then maybe the whole world, was a book called Legends and Lattes. And it's about this female half-orc fighter who retires from being an adventurer and sort of like a sword for hire. And she's saved up some money and she came across this curious device actually by gnomes. And then in fantasy, gnomes are kind of like little dwarves who are good at building things.
right.
And she came across this curious device. If you read the description, it's basically an espresso machine. And so she, through the course of this book, sets up a little, like she invents the cafe for her retirement. But like someone from her past comes back. So there are some fantasy stakes, but it's really like, and I also read another one recently called Rewitched. So not like bewitched, but rewitched, about someone who sort of lived in our modern world and had been taking her powers for granted and just trying to get by with her job. And she worked at a bookstore, so of course, you're right in. But then she had like a use it or lose it kind of test, and it turned out she failed, and they were going to take her magic from her. And so there are some really wonderful female-centered things that are also low stakes. Like there are some really high stakes ones with female heroines.
Right.
But I'm very much enjoying the low stakes novels.
The less end of the world kind of thing.
Yeah. My husband and I just finished listening to on audiobook all of The Wheel of Time, which is a 14 book.
Right.
I mean, absolute enormous thing. Like some of the books are 56 hours
Yeah,
long.
right.
And so we were listening to it together and we did that, and we loved it in a lot of ways. And there are some fantastic characters, but boy, were we a little tired
Right.
at the end of that. Yeah.
Elizabeth Colby says Ilona Andrews. So I'm gonna write this down because I read a lot. I listen to a lot of books on
Yeah.
tape because I do. So when I'm at home, I do a lot of watercoloring.
Oh, yeah.
And so I can listen and it allows me to do sort of, multiple things. And the long one that Sarah was just talking about was Wheel of Time, and that's by
Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan.
They
And
actually started filming a series based on it
right.
on Prime, Amazon Prime. Did a pretty good series. I haven't watched series 2 yet.
Yeah.
And I'm very worried about what they've done with one of my favorite characters at the end of series 1, which is why I haven't started back in. I'm like so worried.
Yeah. Helen asked me if I had watched
Moonflower Murders and what was the
yeah,
first one? Magpie Murders.
Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders on probably Acorn or
Acorn or BritBox, one or the
yeah,
other.
BritBox. And I've read both books. And so and his
Anthony Horowitz.
yeah, Anthony Horowitz is the author. And I've read a lot of his stuff. So anyway, it's like I don't always like to watch what I've read. So yeah, PBS,
Yeah.
Masterpiece Theater, absolutely.
We've had a few other book and author recommendations in the
Oh,
chat.
excellent.
Midlife in Gretna Green by Lynn's Day and Jodie Taylor, who does a wonderful time traveling historians series. Although I love that one, but it does get a bit intense.
Okay. Okay, so books. I think knitters and books probably go together for sure. And, it's liking, visual and textural, books can be very textural anyway. So, I wanted to ask you a question that Helen came up with.
Okay.
So, how does the yarn that you're using to design with affect how you design?
Oh, that is such a good question because I design almost entirely on the needles. There are times when I have to sketch things out ahead of time, and really commit ahead of time, and I usually don't like that process very much at all because I don't feel as clever when I'm sketching or planning as I do once I have the yarn on the needles. So I am very much an on the needles designer. And for me, the texture changes things, but I'm largely a color person. And so that will really change how I feel about things. Like dark colors don't show texture very much. So if I'm designing with darker yarn, I'm doing simpler things there, or I'm looking to pair it and contrast it and make something pop. And I think what's neat about designing, because I'm designing on the needles, I'm always asking like, what am I trying to make pop? So like when I'm trying to make, I've got dark yarn. Is it the dark yarn that I want to feature? And how do I do that? If there are lights around it, the lights are going to try to grab attention. So then I'm like problem solving to keep things focused on the dark, for instance, or focused on the light. I think it really, the colors very much drive questions like that. Like what is the focus? And with gnomes, especially because there's character as well as knitting problems to solve. It really changes things, and it's hard to describe. I think it's there's like the color thing is very literal and very much about focus for me. So for instance, I'll pull up Narina here. Um, she the whole thing with the shawl. I was really excited to design a gnome that had a shawl instead of a beard. And it's a really tiny design space. So I have so many failed shawls A bunch of them ended up looking like thong underwear. It was really funny. Um, I don't know what gnomes get up to, but this was not the shawl I was looking for. But then I finally got it designed, and it's you'll notice like there's some radical shaping going on at the top of that shawl because we want it to be kind of like shaped like a shawl, but gnomes have no neck. They have just huge shoulders, and so to go around the distance, I had to really like ramp up. But then these ends turned out too long, and they were getting in the way of the knitting, which is also supposed to be one of the big focuses. So I was stuck with having too many special things, it felt like. And I'm lucky to have a couple of really great designer friends, and we have a video chat that we have so that we
Right.
can show each other problems fast, which is great because if you've ever tried to type out a knitting problem and then like put a picture with it and try to get feedback, it's just agonizing. So we were all brainstorming, and eventually I was like so mad, and in the video I was like I just need it to be this much shorter, and someone said stop, Sarah, this is actually that's solving your problem just by folding it and getting a better like the loops of the shawl actually bring attention back to her face because the diagonal our brain loves diagonal lines, and it
Right.
also echoes the diagonal of the
Needle.
knitting needle. So you've got an echo here that also echoes here and
Right.
echoes here, and so everything started lining up, and that's one of those things where the that's less a yarn part of it, but I'm just giving it as an
Right.
example how much it's like I solved one problem by getting the shawl all the way around her neck. But in order to do that, I created another problem with myself for myself, which was that then it was too long, but then I solved that problem. And so it's the yarn fighting me with color. There's been a couple times when I've really rued the colors I asked for. I was like, I did not think that through. And there have been times when I've problem solved my way out of it. And there have been times when I've had to go back to a dyer and been like, I'm gonna eat humble pie and I'm just gonna let you know, really messed up. And can I have just a medium tone instead of a light tone or something
Right.
like that?
Right.
But it's very visceral for me. And sometimes I can't even start designing till I get the yarns on hand. I'll just message a dyer and I'll just say like, I want to do an autumn gnome. Can you photograph a couple different options for me? And then I'll pick one of those. And then until they arrive, I can't even really start to think
Of
about,
course.
is this like autumnal like pumpkin or autumnal like leaf? And color is so central to the story
Right.
for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, so I think at this point, does anyone have questions they want to ask Sarah? You feel free to unmute yourself and
Well, Cindy just asked, do you ever meet people and think, that person would make a great gnome? Because she does.
Actually, it's funny. I do look at people and houses and dogs and all sorts of things and think that's kind of that's a gnome. The people that I see most often and think about gnomes are almost always bikers. Those beards, they've got like sunglasses on and you can't see their eyes always. They're just like they kind of break down very visually like into those key chunks the way a gnome design breaks down into kind of like
right.
three main shapes.
Cool. Yeah. Anyone else? Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to talk about our yarn and
Nadia says she finds it hard to get a good stuffing for the taller gnomes like
oh,
Narina and Nando versus the rounder gnomes like Maddie. Are there any tips you can share?
Yeah, so Nadia, my first question would be, have you watched my video on stuffing gnomes? I've got a couple. One of them's in my gnome schooling playlist, and I think it was probably linked in the pattern. And I'm just going to reiterate what I say there. If you think about a gnome as being kind of like a tote bag, and if you dumped apples into a tote bag, it's not going to be like a great shape and it's not going to be very stable, right? There's going to be lumps, there's going to be hard places and soft places where there's air lumps and whatever. And so when I'm stuffing those taller gnomes, I really work on flattening the stuffing out as I go and building up. So I'll like stuff it in and then I'll flatten it with my fingers and thumb and spread it out. So rather than dumping apples into that tote bag, it's like I'm filling it with crepe, layer after layer of crepes, pancakes, just kind of like setting each one all the way to the edge and stopping and really taking my time. They're big, so we want to rush. And you got to like just slow right down and breathe and not rush your way through it. I also spend a lot of time like shaping from the outside with this hand. So as you're stuffing into something that the other hand is holding, and the outside hand can help kind of pack things down, but it can also sense, am I going, oh, this was really loose, and all of a sudden I'm really firm over here. So it can sort of start sensing whether you're changing the thickness and the density of what's going on. But like fluffing your yarn, or not your yarn, like pull your stuffing apart a bit before you use it, go slowly, really concentrate on packing it all the way to the edges and use that outside hand. And then again, just be patient. The temptation is to overstuff. The other problem is that generally the larger they are, the stretchier they are. And so you can distort them fairly easily. Like the hat maybe wants to like just really take all the stuffing and then be too big or something like that. So you have to pack firmly, but not be distorting the fabric at the same time. So it's almost like you want to create inside there a tiny, firm little bit of stuffing that is the same size as that, but not bigger than it. And so that's why going slowly really matters, because if you don't go slowly, you will be overstuffing in terms of like creating a bigger shape inside.
I'm just going to pitch in a quick tip too, is that I've used that really cheap, fluffy batting and cut out kind of a rectangle and rolled it and used that as the base and just added a bit of padding around it for the taller gnomes because that gives it some structure.
So if you were to take it and almost like a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
Like roll it up. Is that what you're saying, Helen?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good idea because then you'd have that center stability. And the really big gnomes, like this one here and that one in the middle there, I actually take plastic containers, fill them with some weighted stuffing. So like this one has 2-liter pop bottle in it, and it's got about a cup or two of my weighted stuffing in the plastic container, and the rest is air. And that provides like a really nice bit of structure and weight. These are also bulky and worsted weight, and at that size, the weighted stuffing really wants to squirm through the edges if you don't put it in something like a gauze bag or a nylon stocking or a plastic container.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question.
Yep.
What's weighted stuffing?
Okay. So fluffy stuffing is the stuff we all imagine, and we've all like sewn up a wounded teddy bear. But with a lot of gnomes and other toys that are tall and narrow, you need to pull the center of gravity down.
Right.
And so like the bottom, depending on the gnome, the bottom quarter of the body or more is filled with something like either poly pellets, which is like a plastic little plastic beads almost.
Okay.
And those ones are child safe from 3 and up. I use split peas. I love how small they are to the density of their weight. Like a kidney bean is lumpy and very lightweight compared to that. So I use that. Some people use aquarium gravel, but some people use those like squashed glass beads. Anything that kind of pulls the weight, the center of gravity down, because tall and skinny wants to tip.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Elizabeth asked, how many gnomes do you have in your house, Sarah?
So the last count put me over 170 gnomes in the house. And so I've got a video on YouTube called Tour My Gnome Cabinet. And that is so out of date that I have 2 gnome cabinets now, and they are actually borderline too full. I mean, for the book, I did every gnome in both fingering weight and DK weight. I've knit a couple of them a few more extra times. And I mean, there's some gnomes I have to prototype a lot. First one I did with legs and little like feet with the curled toes, the adventure gnome. That one, I think I have 7 prototypes all across the top of one of my shelves. Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
Exactly. And
so sweet. I love that.
yeah, so that's a good question. I need to count again. Maybe I'll do like a census. It's like December 30th. When the odds are really low, I'll just last minute dash out and do another whole gnome in the last 24 hours. But I'm actually thinking it's going to skyrocket again next year. I'm doing another year of gnomes knit along, where if you knit a gnome in a month, you can enter for prizes and have fun. And it's going to be very unstructured and just a lot of fun. But one of the things I want to do is I want to make advent calendars for my kids, right? Like I have little tiny gnomes and I knit 24 for myself and got little bags off Etsy with numbers on them. So every year I just randomly put them in the bags. And every day in December, I open one up. And I want to make those for my kids. They're in their 20s now. And I kind of want to gift them their own advent. But that's 48 gnomes if you have 2 kids. But then again,
Yeah,
they wouldn't be in my house. So, but
yeah.
I'm one of those people that once I start doing a lot of something, especially the little gnomes, it's really hard for me to stop. Like I finish one and I'm like, yeah, but what if it was a blue hat? And then I go and I do
Right,
another blue hat.
right.
And it's just so hard to stop once I start the little ones.
So Lisa wants to know, where do you find your inspiration?
Oh, I honestly find it everywhere. I find it a lot of time in dollar stores and grocery stores because they got a lot of gnomes these days. Garden centers, there's lots of gnomes. But I'm not like ripping them off one on one. A lot of
Right,
times, the things you can do with, like, say, felt or fabric or ceramic, you actually can't do in knitting. Like, I
right.
can't get the same place. But once I start problem solving that, it actually takes me to a different place. So there's partly just that. Like I see a gnome and I'm like, ooh, I love that. Could we do that in knitted fabric and still have people like me? Like you can almost always design something, but that doesn't mean people want and will like you at the end, right? Like I'm always worried that people will be like, well, I finished that gnome, but it's my last. And I'm never trusting her again, especially the mystery gnomes. So I also spend a lot of time looking at other things. Like I look at sweaters and I see gnomes. I look at socks and I see gnomes. I'll just be out and looking at stitch patterns. I love looking at stitch patterns. And so, I mean, there was this one, a lot of people like want to know which came first because here, I'll just reach down. I have 2 shawls that knit side to side and they are self-fringing. So hang on, here's this one. Um, you don't cut the fringe and add it. You add a couple extra
Right,
stitches and
right.
drop them when you're done knitting. And I actually knit this one first. And as I was knitting it, I thought, I wonder if we could make that a beard. And now it's one of my favorite beards of all. It's on that one you showed, the adventure gnome. We knit, it's
Right,
the same basic
right.
technique. And so I was in the middle of shawl design and I'll go, ooh, I wonder if we could gnome that. And so I actually find it difficult not to have gnome ideas. I've got a lot in my sketchbook and a lot of things just like pictures
Right.
randomly on my camera roll. And I also even find inspiration a lot of times from like when we're outside in nature or traveling. That's one place I got my imagined landscapes name from. My father's a research scientist, but also a photographer. And growing up, seeing the landscape through a photographer's eye, as soon as I started knitting, all of a sudden I started looking at the way the fabric looked so much. And I mean, especially like, stockinette fabric or whatever in the
Right,
prairies, there's obviously commonalities. It's just
right.
everything's flat and very subtle texture. But there's also a lot of things where I'll see a waterfall and I'll start thinking about cables or stitch patterns or the way things shift. And so there's almost nothing that doesn't make me think, I bet I could make a gnome out of that, even if it's the colors.
So we've had a couple of questions. One is, what do you think about the origins of gnomes? Her father is Swedish, used to talk to her about similar beings. He called them Tomte, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah, so there's Tomta in Sweden. There's Nisse, I think is Norse or Norwegian. And I know in Iceland I think they call them like little elves more in Iceland, but they do have these ideas of these little creatures that live around them. And if you're not kind of kind to them, they can sometimes come and cause mischief. Like you have to on Christmas Eve, I think a lot of the tradition was you had to leave a bowl of porridge out just for them
right,
and
exactly.
those sorts of things. And I love that. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. This idea that you would be somewhere and things wouldn't always be where you left them, and things aren't always explicable to like an everyday experience. And I think too to make life seem more warm and cozy, just the idea that we're not necessarily completely alone, and maybe there's somebody watching out over us or maybe a little bit against us at times. It makes a lot of sense. Then I went to Norway and I was like 100%. I believe all of these stories because we were walking along and we're walking past like along a river and there was moss and the moss had grown so deep and it was growing over the rocks so much. It was actually dangerous to be on the moss because you couldn't tell when a boulder would just end and there would just be air between it and the next boulder, but the moss had grown over it. And it looked to us like these boulders covered in moss, and then sticks would fall on them, and then leaves, and then more moss. And then it looked like a troll, had sat down and hunkered down. And you
Right.
could believe that at any minute that would totally just like stand up and be like, oh, I'm awake now. And I'm shaking off my slumber. It just like Norway, I got there and I was like, I see this completely. Like, yes, everywhere I went, it was so perfect for gnomes. I was just like, yeah, no kidding. This makes sense to me. I think it's great. I love learning about folklore all over the world. It's one of my favorite things. And I really enjoy this idea that the gnomes were one of those creatures that were maybe sort of like not quite symbiotically in relationship with humans in the way the stories worked, but just sort of like we're passing each other a lot in the night, and sometimes we interact.
Yeah. So how did you get into gnomes? Cindy asked.
I've always loved them. The first time I saw like a Scandinavian style gnome, I loved it. I don't love the garden gnomes. And so you'll never see me put eyes on these things.
Right,
I don't want faces. I just love the little covered
right.
face. That is a big part of it for me. I'm not positive when I started loving them, but I can't remember a time when I didn't like them. And for a long time, I would just go to Christmas markets and hope to see something, and then hope that I also had the budget for it because, university students and whatever, we just had no
Right.
money. But I just love them. And then when I did find a knitting pattern for one, and I started knitting it, and I couldn't stop. I was so excited, and I started tweaking it instantly. Like it had a round bottom, and it was driving me crazy. I wanted a flat bottom, and then I didn't want to have to sew the hat on. And then I just kept, what if the beard was like this? And what if the hat was taller? And I just started doing this. And that's why the very first pattern I put out is called Never Not Gnoming.
Right.
Because
And you're an engineer's daughter, that's for sure.
I just couldn't stop. I was like, what if it was taller or shorter or striped? And so my son would walk in and be like, hashtag mama's never not gnoming. And that's where the pattern name came from, is because he was always mocking me.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to turn this around on you. And,
So
but yeah,
people love the backstories on your gnomes.
yeah, I think that's actually part of the reason they became as popular as they are. I think they didn't originally have it. When I put out the first pattern, I named the three pattern sizes, but I
Right.
didn't have the little stories that went with it. And that actually came about because of Ravelry's advertising. So if you've seen the bottom of like a Ravelry forum, there's this little ad space that's like the most awkward shape possible
It is.
for knitting like you've at least got skeins of yarn. Skeins of yarn are the perfect size for that, but it is like this most impossible space. So I had like a gnome, little tiny blip, and then I had like 90% empty space. And I was like, I tried filling it with the gnome over and over, and it got messy. And so I kept looking at this empty space, and I just started typing, and I wrote something like Natasha's from New Zealand and likes artisanal pickles, and I laughed. And then I wrote Norbert, on the other hand, likes hang gliding or something like this, and I just started laughing and laughing. I just, I was a
Yep.
small designer, part-time business. I just threw the ads up on Instagram or on Ravelry and just kind of laughed if
Right.
I saw them. But the response was really big. And eventually I went and I started putting the backstories, I put them back in the pattern. And I
Right.
think, and then I like that a lot of people then do their own. They'll be like, well, that's your version of like your Narina maybe went to Churchill, but mine is going to the desert, or mine is, yours likes pickles, but mine makes her own yogurt and likes rock climbing or whatever. And so people, I think that invited people to play a little bit more. And I love that my design business encourages people to play because this is our free time. And we often, as knitters, take it so seriously. It's like, well, I can't buy more yarn until I use that up, or I can't work on my sweater until I've finished this Christmas gift. And we make all these rules and we make it like a job almost. And I think every now and then you knit a gnome and it's just like, or it's just for
Right.
fun. There's no
Right.
good reason to make a gnome. It's just for fun.
Yep.
Marina says that she understands Narina is from Churchill, Manitoba. She was thrilled with that because she visited there to see the polar bears. What made you choose that location?
So I've always wanted to go to Churchill. In Canada, Churchill has a very almost mythological place in our nation's stories. Churchill is very far to the north. Most Canadian provinces are tall and skinny.
Yes.
So Manitoba is bigger than Texas and has 1 million people that live in it. And 800,000 of them live within 150 miles of the US border. So I can't tell you in words, like even the lower bit is very isolated. You can't drive to Churchill. You used to be able to take a train to Churchill, and then because of some flooding and some other problems with climate change, those train tracks have destabilized. So there is no way for me to get to Churchill that isn't flying there. And even the fact that you had to take a train for like when I was growing up as a girl, like this was a place that had this sort of like legendary status almost. And it was one of the places when the fur trade was a very big part of why all of this area was settled by Europeans. And it was a big sort of interaction point. Like the stories from that are just amazing. And then, okay, so here's my favorite story from Churchill. So the polar bears can't go out and eat until the ice forms because they eat when the seals have their babies and the seals are on the ice. So until then, they wake up from hibernation and they're kind of roaming around, but they're just hungry. They're hungry most of the summer and they're waiting for that ice. So we have Halloween. So October, these bears are hungry and waiting for the ice. And Churchill is a place already where people don't lock their doors and they leave their car doors unlocked because if you need to run into a car to not be eaten by a polar bear, you don't want to be the neighbor that locked their car. So this is already kind of the context. Humans are snacks slash meals, and a child in a Halloween costume is basically just a very attractive snack to a polar bear. So on Halloween, the adults of Churchill actually sort of like ring the town with rifles so that the children can run around and have their fun. So Churchill has this very cool status in my mind. And it's like I can never decide if I want to go in summer to see the polar bears, because that's when they're around and on land, or do I go in winter and see the northern lights? Because those are sort of like the two things. And so it's so expensive to get there, even though it's in my province, that it's like I kind of feel like I have to pick just one, and I've never been able to pick, and I've never gone. So
Yeah.
she's gone, and I haven't.
Okay. So Marina says you can take a train again. She
Okay,
apparently it's been restabilized. So
awesome. I missed that news. I'm gonna go have to look that up again because I also love taking trains. They're just
yeah.
wonderful.
Okay. So I at this point I wanted to these are the other gnomes, the other lady, the other Narinas. in the other colors. Helen knit all of them.
In like a month.
Oh, it was actually like a week and a half.
That is too much knitting. That is
It was
wild.
a lot, but it was during the hurricane, so I had 3 days of just like sitting at home knitting while it was raining, and that was good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot of knitting. I can't
It
knit
was,
them that quickly.
yeah, it was a lot of knitting, and she did it. Um, and I I don't know that I have any other things to talk about at this precise moment. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to address them at this point, answer them. Um, so, ah,
Lisa says, "What else do you like to knit, Sarah?" And Carol asks if gnomes will have pets soon.
Ooh. So I like to knit everything. I am constantly cold. So I knit a lot of socks. I've been knitting while we're talking because I knit stockinette socks because I can do that without looking and it doesn't ask anything of me. Like
right,
stockinette knitting in the round, I feel like gives everything and takes nothing from me. Whereas
right,
design takes from me, even if I'm loving it. So I love that stockinette, that thing that it does to our brain waves and like just mellows us out like meditation.
right.
Brilliant. But I'm cold and I love sweaters, so I'm like all like I always want to be knitting everything. But I would say I balance between right now I'm trying to do more sweaters and fewer socks. I say that, but my husband just blew through 4 pairs of socks in the last week because he only likes to wear hand knit socks
Yeah,
and wears them year round. So I do have to keep
right.
up on that a little bit. And about the pets. So that's an interesting thing. So it's kind of complicated in my mind. If gnomes have pets, but they also have woodland creatures they talk to in some of my stories. But then again, I wrote a story where there's a pony farm. So like clearly there is something there. There's a ladybug queen. And the ladybug queen, she's sort of I think she's queen of the Grimblewoods over everybody and not just the ladybugs. I sometimes throw out a backstory and then realize, wait, there might be implications for my my pretend world that I haven't thought through. But I am hoping to actually start designing some more woodland creatures. Um, but that's going to be sort of out of my current, like I can design a gnome like bang. They sometimes fight me. Narina fought me a little bit to get to her final incarnation, but the woodland creatures is going to involve me thinking three-dimensionally in different ways. And so but I do want to do that. Like I have this vision of a hedgehog family that I really want to figure out if I can get out of here and onto the needles some point.
Yeah. So classes.
Hmm.
Do you have any classes scheduled virtually or otherwise? And I love taking your class in the past. Elizabeth.
Two, I happen to have a retreat that I'm going to be attending that's hosted by Miss Babs. You might know somebody you could ask about that retreat. I also have an events page on my website. So I try to keep that up to date. It's a little not quite there yet. A little bit, I've made some commitments that have not yet made it, but I've tried to keep that so that online classes and in-person classes are posted there so that you can then choose to join. And I also have a news page, which I'm also trying to keep up to date, which is a lot right now because I stretched, like there's a lot going on. So I'm not always, there's only one of me and there's a lot of the gnomes. And so it feels like maybe I need to hire some of them as my assistants. But I'm attempting to keep my news page and my events page up to date and failing currently, but failing forwards.
But you don't know if the gnomes wouldn't trick you on your website.
They would sign you up for a lot more stuff, Sarah. You'd have no free time.
I have no freedom. Yeah, they'd really have me doing yoga and then yoga classes for them, and they just I feel like they think I had more energy than I do.
Oh, okay. Anything else? I do have one thing, and I'm going to ask, let's see. We have 36 people on the group, and you have a way of being able to count.
Mhm.
So I would like Sarah to pick a number between 1 and 36.
That's so much pressure. 24.
Okay.
So Helen's going to count, and this person will,
Marina
Welch is going to, you need to contact Helen at info@missbabs.com. And you will be receiving a $50 gift certificate so that you can spend it on anything you want or on a
Nana's visit.
Nana's visit set, which needs to ship early. We've got a number of them on the website, and you'll get the glasses and everything.
Yeah,
So,
and Nana's Visit is the December Mystery Gnome, which
yes,
starts December 1st, and that's the one that gets a little storybook as well as knitting. You get emails every day from the 1st to the 21st, but not every day is knitting because people got lives.
right.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Sandy asked, is Savor the Moment a standalone, not a knit along? We have a very informal knit along happening in our Ravelry group. And we also have a Facebook group, although I think I'm the only one that's posted there recently with some updates. So you're welcome to knit along with us there, but it's not a very formal thing, and it's not run by Sarah. But you're welcome to join us, Sarah, if you ever want to stop in and say hi.
So, okay. Well, thank you. And I sure appreciate everyone being here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful to meet new folks and see some familiar faces. So
Yeah.
thanks, everyone.
Yeah. And
It's
Sarah,
wonderful.
thank you so much for designing Narina and joining us today. So
Oh, I love talking to you, Babs.
thank you. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.